30,000, Minister. That's the number of Ukrainians who are killed or wounded every month in the counter-offensive against the Russian invasion. The wounded are generally driven to the hospital, often in the back of an ordinary car or truck. A delay of hours, which medical experts say significantly increases the chances of death or permanent disability. That's why the Ukrainian government needs helicopters for aeromedical evacuation and has asked Australia to donate the Taipans, which we've retired. The narrative of the Albanese government that the Taipan fleet is beyond repair was demonstrated to be inaccurate by photos published last week, which show the majority of the fleet hanging in Townsville, largely intact, and subsequently confirmed as being airworthy. Minister, why is the government so intent on digging a hole and burying these airworthy helicopters rather than helping save Ukrainian lives?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and I think I respect Senator Fawcett's involvement and engagement, obviously, in his time in which he served the nation, and also on the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee. And I know how much he means that question with great sincerity. And he would know that we have had bipartisan support for Ukraine since Russia's illegal and immoral invasion. And you would know that in opposition, the Labor Party supported the then government's position on Ukraine, and in government we have continued to provide support to Ukraine, including the training of personnel. And I think I've said in this chamber, possibly one of the most moving visits I have made has been to the location in the United Kingdom where Ukrainian troops are being trained by Australians, by British and other defence forces. And you meet people who are postal workers and farmers and clerks who are prepared to die for their country. So we share his concern about this. I'm advised in relation to the Taipans that it has obviously, the Taipan has been managed as a project of concern by the Department of Defence since 2011. The Senator would know of the tragic crash which saw the loss of Australian lives in July, and the fact that the government announced in September of 2023 that the MRH-90 would not return to flying operations. I'm advised that Defence received a request from the Ambassador of Ukraine and that by this date the helicopters had already been subject to extensive disassembly. This decision has been communicated to the Ambassador.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Fawcett, first supplementary.
Minister, I and the Ukrainian government appreciate the support of both sides of this chamber, but the reality is Ukraine first expressed an interest in using the Taipans for casualty evacuation during a meeting that I held with them at the NATO conference in October last year. And I made sure that your government was advised of that interest before I even left Copenhagen to return to Australia. Minister, why didn't the Albanese government even bother to pick up the phone to consult the Ukrainians before deciding on a plan to just dig a hole and bury the helicopters?
The time for asking has expired. Minister Wong.
Thank you. As I understand it, on all occasions, or in relation to these matters, that the government has acted on the basis of advice from Defence. The advice I have is that the advice from Defence was clear that this was not the right platform for Ukraine, and the government and Defence made decisions, and the government on that basis.
Senator Fawcett, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. I think the Ukrainians are well placed to decide what platform will keep their soldiers alive. And Minister, now that the government has a formal request from Ukraine and it has been established that a number of the helicopters remain airworthy in Townsville, will the Albanese government reverse its decision and donate the aircraft, even in their current state, to allow Ukraine to work with its NATO partners who continue to safely operate the same type of helicopter to establish an aeromedical capability to save the lives of their people?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Wong.
Thank you. In relation to this issue, we will continue to take advice from Defence about the best way forward in relation to this platform, but also I would make the broader point that the government continues to keep under review the nature and breadth of the assistance to Ukraine.
I rise to take note of answers to questions asked by coalition senators, and I obviously want to come to this issue of the Taipan helicopters. And the minister has correctly advised that the government is responding in accordance with the briefs provided by Defence. But I would offer that the evidence that appeared last week, with the photographs of helicopters largely intact in hangars at Townsville, and the subsequent confirmation that whilst they are not flyable at the moment because of the removal of some parts, they are largely intact and that they are still airworthy. And it is common practice during defence servicing of aircraft, including helicopters, for parts to be removed and then reinstalled. And in fact, the disposal plan that Defence has talked about goes to the issue of the removal of parts for sale. And I know from my experience dealing with the airworthiness system in Defence that for another nation to buy those parts, they will need to be assured that they have been removed by qualified technicians in accordance with approved processes, which means that the aircraft are still airworthy, and just like at the end of a servicing period, parts can be replaced. Now, the Minister, Conroy, has made the comment that this would be beyond a reasonable expectation that Australia should put these aircraft back together. Well, I disagree with that, but even if you accepted that, the request from the Ukrainian government makes it clear that they would work with their NATO allies, including Germany and France, who take a lead in the NATO Defence Contact Group, or the European Defence Contact Group, for Ukraine. And they are two of the founders of the NATO Helicopters Industry Group that produce the helicopters and operate them on behalf of NATO countries. They are partners in Airbus, who have people in Europe who are supporting the same type of helicopter, and those helicopters are A, operating safely, and B, as we see through people like even New Zealand, are getting far higher rates of serviceability than the Australian Army, for whatever reason, managed to get here. So for the Defence Force here to say that they don't think this is a suitable platform for Ukraine, who are showing themselves remarkably adept at taking on a range of platforms, from fast jets to precision-guided weapons to unmanned seaborne systems that are having great effect against Russian forces, I think it's the height of arrogance to say that we don't think that they are up to handling these helicopters when clearly other nations have been able to actually operate them more effectively than we have. They're operating safely, and the Ukrainians have done their homework, and they have indicated in their formal request that they believe they can work with their European partners to operate these aircraft in an aeromedical casualty evacuation role, which has been proven ever since the Vietnam War to be a key factor in saving lives. And it is a real issue for the Ukrainians. Some hospitals, for example, a hospital in Dnipro, are doing between 50 and 100 operations a day. This hospital alone has performed more than 3,000 amputations, committing soldiers to a life of disability, whereas the medical science shows that early intervention, getting people to medical facilities and surgical support early, not only saves lives but, importantly, prevents some of the disability outcomes that result, particularly from the blast injuries that we are seeing in Ukraine. So if Defence don't believe that they have the money or the manpower or the time to get the aircraft, which are in Townsville, largely intact, back into a flying state, given they are already airworthy, then the option is to just donate the airframes as they are to the Ukrainians, who can then work with their European partners to put the tail rotor gearboxes and other parts which are being apparently sold to NH Industries, who are the people who actually work in Europe. So they would have the airframes and the parts and the workforce to work with the Ukrainian government to make these aircraft available. So there is nothing for the Australian government or the Australian Defence Force to fear in terms of cost implications of donating the airframes because the Ukrainians have indicated they will work with other partners to get them airworthy. So I am bemused, Deputy President. In fact, I am alarmed by the attitude that is being taken, which appears to be a mindless adherence to a decision that was taken some months ago, and despite the new information of the request from Ukraine, their considered position that they believe they can operate them safely and effectively with the support of their allies, the fact that it will save lives, it appears that organisations here are perhaps more concerned about saving face than they are about saving lives. And that is not the Australia I know. That is not the Australia that has put its shoulder to the wheel many times to support like-minded nations, and particularly here, where we're seeing such a great loss of life and injury to their population as they fight against totalitarian regimes in order to protect the democracy that we share and want to preserve.